Okay, so welcome everybody to our meeting today and our discussion about Planet of Clay and Leri's translation of Samar Yazbek's novel. We're very lucky to be joined by Leri. Thank you so much. Wonderful translator, person, friend to Minawa and to all, who joined us back in June when we talked about No Knives in the Kitchens of the City, Khalid Khalifa's novel. And you're back again, very generously giving of your time and energy to talk with us about Planet of Clay, which came out last year and was a National Book Award finalist. So congratulations, Mabruk on that. And the novel came out as Al-Masha'a back in 2017, the original Arabic version. So the structure today is going to be pretty similar to what we had last time when we did Khalid Khalifa's novel. For those of you who weren't there, basically, I have some questions on hand to kind of get the ball rolling and to keep it rolling. But like I said before, we do want this to be a very engaged, free-flowing discussion. So whenever you have any comments or questions, feel free to raise your hand, pop a comment in the chat. And we'd really like this to be more of a dialogue and conversation with Leri. So before we get going, I thought I'd just read the bio here that we have for both Samar and yourself, and then we can get going talking a little bit about your background and how you came to this novel. So it says here, I'm sure a lot of you are probably familiar with Samar Yazbek's work, but for those of you who aren't, she's a Syrian writer, novelist, and journalist. She was born in Jebla in 1970 and studied literature before beginning her career as a journalist and scriptwriter for Syrian television and film. Her novels include Cinnamon and Planet of Clay. Her accounts of the Syrian conflict include A Woman in the Crossfire, Diaries of the Syrian Revolution, and The Crossing, My Journey to the Shattered Heart of Syria. Yazbek's work has been translated into multiple languages and has been recognized with numerous awards, notably the French Best Foreign Book Award, the PEN Oxfam Novib, and PEN Pinter Awards. Leri Price, also award-winning, award-winning literary translator of contemporary Arabic fiction. Price's translation of Khalid Khalifa's Death is Hard Work was a finalist for the 2019 National Book Award for Translated Literature and winner of the 2020 Saif Robash Banapal Prize for Arabic Literary Translation. Her translation of Khalid Khalifa's No Knives in the Kitchens of the City was shortlisted for the Alta National Translation Award. And Price's other recent translations include Sarab by award-winning writer Raja Alam. So, yes, very amazing work.
Thanks, Lindsay.
Thank you for joining us again. And I think, Gino, just to start it off, maybe you could give us a little, brief sketch of your background, how you came to literary translation and in general, and then more specifically to this work by Samar, because I believe it's your first translation of her work, yes?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So first of all, thank you all so much for inviting me back. I had a wonderful time last time talking about No Knives, and it's really nice to see so many people came back again. So hooray! And so I'm really enjoying being in Minawa again. And also thank you for bearing with me. I'm not at my best. I've succumbed, unfortunately, to circumstances. And so, sort of if I need to do some sneezing, or if I sort of don't seem at my sharpest, that's why. So please do bear with me. I've said to Layla, I've got my makeup on, I've taken my Lemsip. This is, I'm functioning at the absolute best that I can. So please do bear with me with that. Right, so on to the questions. My background, I think like many people, I came to literary translation in a sort of slightly roundabout manner. I actually studied Arabic at the University of Edinburgh. And I actually went to study English literature. I had no connection to Arabic whatsoever. I don't have a background connection to the region. And I had to take an outside subject, as we do in Scotland. And I originally was going to take French and couldn't because the timetable clashed. And so I was still under A, and I thought, oh, Arabic, that's interesting. I've never thought of it. And then it just sort of took over my life, and I became completely obsessed with it. And, you know, almost 20 years later, here I am, still working with it. So that was an excellent fortuitous discovery. The universe, you know, did its thing. And in terms of how I came into translation, how I personally find learning languages sort of the most effective and the most fun way, let's be honest, is actually just by reading. So reading stories and reading newspapers. And of course, in Arabic, I mean, you know, we're sort of spoiled for choice when it comes to, you know, incredible short stories. So I went to the library, I picked up, I think it was Zachariah Taylor actually was the first thing that I tried to read, and some children's books as well, because I mean, you know, it's good to aspire high, but you know, you've got to get yourself there. And yeah, it sort of came from there really. And my first thing that I ever translated was a short story by Maisie Erdem. So I always have a soft spot for her. Yeah, The Suitcase. Yeah, and that was for a class that I did. I didn't have to translate it. I just wanted to, and was just like, you know, right, this is what I do now, forever. So yeah, it just sort of went from there. And you know, I sort of started reading more widely and sort of having a go at translating stuff. And there was some, you know, I studied in Cairo for a while, and sort of through contacts there, I sort of was trying different types of texts and making lots of mistakes, and just sort of, you know, slowly coming around to it. And yeah, and I just sort of eased into the literary translation life. So it's always sort of been bubbling away in my life. You know, I've, like many people, I've developed careers outside of it. But yeah, it's just something that I hope will be part of my life forever.
Yeah, but it wasn't something that you set out to do. It was just, you kind of stumbled into it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I spent quite a long time trying not to be a translator, because it's, you know, I mean, work-wise, it's quite precarious. And also, as someone who, I mean, I've spoken to you about this, Layla, when you sort of are not from a background with any connection to the Manawa region, I find it quite stressful sometimes. Yeah. Because, you know, there's things that I know that I don't know, but there's stuff that I don't know that I don't know, and that's the stuff that is really frightening. So yeah, it's something that, you know, I do sort of wrestle with sometimes, but yeah, I just love it. You know, I feel so privileged to be able to read those texts so deeply, because I mean, you know, even when you are a reader who, you know, adores books, and, you know, I'm quite a slow reader. I don't tend to sort of go quickly through things, and I reread, which I know not everybody does. But, you know, when you translate, you just enter into a completely, you know, unique relationship with the text, and, you know, you notice things so deeply, and you know, sometimes stuff that even the author doesn't catch. Like I remember one of Khalid's books, he killed one of his characters on one page, and then he resurrected her on another page, and I said, oh my gosh, have I got the timings wrong? And he said, no, this was a draft of something, by the way. And he said, oh no, don't worry, I just lost track. So we sort of we patched it up. But you know, it's really you know, and of course you get to work with writers like Samar, like Khalid, you know, who are just so incredibly generous, and they're so interesting to talk to. And, you know, it's just, I mean, being in that position where you can work alongside them as well is just magical, really magical. Yeah.
That's great. So this is actually going to lead me quite nicely into our next question, but so you were commissioned to do Planet of Clay. It wasn't something that you set out and pitched. the publisher came to you already wanting a translation of this, yeah?
Well, it was actually Samar's agent, Yasmina Jusati. So we've worked together a few times on a few different things. And she sent me this book and she said, Mashetta has just been published. We're thinking about pitching it. Like, do you want to have a read and see if this is something you'd be interested in? So I read it and, I got back to her like as soon as I'd finished it, and I was just like, oh my God, it has to be me. I must do this.
Yeah.
And so we sort of prepared the pitch and then it went to, I think, a few different people, and we're so lucky that it ended up going to World Editions. They're a dream to work with. Like, the whole team is just amazing.
It's a beautiful book. I mean, it's quite striking, in terms of the cover and even the layout on the page and the text design. It's all very, very carefully crafted. But before we get into that, why don't we talk a little bit about what your translation process actually is, like what the steps you take? I mean, I know you were just talking about how, you're afraid of the things that you don't know, that you know, and then there's also this kind of collaborative back and forth with the author. So maybe we can talk about that. And is that like the only source of information you turn to, as in, looking, to the author about what their intention is, or, to clarify things, or do you do your own independent research outside of the text?
I mean, I always do my own research. Something like but of course it's different. It's different things that you have to look into for different novels. So, for instance, with this one, with Planet of Clay, most of the research was, around the timeline of the war, and things about the the specific geographies sort of around Damascus and Relief Damascus and all that kind of thing, because of where the action takes place. And I'm trying to remember some of the other things that I was looking into. Some of the weapons. I was looking into the effects of chemical attacks, which was quite upsetting. But there's always something in that comes up in the research which sort of just haunts you. I think it's happened with every book. So yeah, that was the one for Planet of Clay. And of course, with the authors themselves, so with Samar, I had a lot of phone conversations with Samar about this book, and it helps to, I think. I mean, the writer has written what they've written, right? So they're the first port of call. And in the end, like, if they have changed things, and if they've sort of changed timelines, for various reasons, to sort of slip through censorship, or to, just to make it clear that this is a work of fiction, not a work of, journalism or documentary archival work or something, which I'm sure we'll get to a bit later, but so if something, for instance, is different, or something is sort of contradicting what I found in my research, then that's always worth knowing. So for instance, Sarab, by Raja Alam, I was reading a lot about the attack on the Great Mosque that happened in Mecca, in Medina. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. This is anyway, and oh, sorry, that's completely derailed me. It's been so long since I've done that book, and now with my brain fog, I'm just like, oh my gosh. Anyway,
we can attribute it to that which must not be named.
Yeah, exactly. And she I spoke to, because I was like, I'm finding lots of different things that I've come across in your writing, and she was like, yeah, like some of that is obviously intentional, some of it is because there was a lot of misinformation that was put out, and that was quite interesting. So there's always, I think, probably the author's the first port of call, but yeah, I always do my own independent research outside, so it's quite interesting. You learn lots of things.
That's great. Does anyone have anything that they want to jump in? Lindsay mentioned in the chat that the title was supposed to be The Blue Pen originally?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Lindsay. It was. So obviously the Arabic title is Al-Musha'a, which is like the
Walking.
female, of the walker. And obviously that it doesn't really, I mean, it sounds a bit not great in English. And yeah, it's so I mean, yeah, the Blue Pen was always a working title. It wasn't ever really anything that anybody was particularly wedded to, because we knew it needed to be something that, was like a central theme in the text. But obviously there's a few different aspects that could be drawn out. So I mean, the editor and I, Lydia, we had Lydia Unsworth, we had lots of back and forth about this and sort of suggestions, and sort of I was still in the sort of realm of thinking about how we could get walking in there. And then she was she's the one who came up with Planet of Clay. And as soon as she said it, I was like, oh yes, absolutely, that's what this book is. This is the Planet of Clay. And then we said to Samar, and she was delighted, and she said, yeah, that's it, like she's got it. She was so happy to, because of course, Samar talks to me and I talk to the editor, so like they don't have I think at some point, I think they did have contact at some point, but like the working relationship is sort of, I'm in the middle.
Yeah.
And and I appreciate that sometimes for authors it might be a bit disconcerting, because you think the editor is so important in shaping the work, and so she was really happy, because she said, oh yes, like she's like, I mean, she's got it, like so she felt just really reassured, which is always nice.
always a plus.
Yeah.
No, I think it's an interesting title, and it's got a lot of once you get through the whole book, there's a lot of links there. I think some of them are more explicit, like with the Little Prince and his planets, but some of them are less explicit but just as resonant, I think, like the circular shape of a planet, and circles are obviously very dominant. This idea of clay and clean, and how human beings are made out of clay and clean, and this kind of fragility of humans is a theme that runs through the book as well. And then there's also like the landscape, and I mean it just has a lot of resonances, I think, that come out quite effectively with the novel. Does anyone want to jump in? I don't want to dominate the question.
Hang on, there's something in the chat.
Researching the context of the novel helps you as a translator.
Okay, that's a good question. Thank you, Rowan. So that is a very interesting question, because I think like anyone, any research that you have to do in any part of your life, for any job, you do a lot which ends up going unused, right? I mean, there's so much that, so for instance, like a text that I'm working on at the moment is set in 19th century Aleppo, and I have so much stuff that I don't need to know about the Ottoman way of life. And interestingly, actually, it's a massive pain when you're trying to work out how the Ottomans furnished their houses, because of course in English you type in Ottoman and
you're going to get some images.
You just get like baskets from IKEA. It's nightmare. So there's been a lot of primary source stuff that's been going on for that book, but it's I think it just sort of, as much as anything, gives you a sense of like the world that this book has emerged from, right? So I think people say this with acting as well, and with you don't necessarily need to say it in the text, but you need to know why it's there. And I think it helps also, I think, as a translator, I like the way I work as a human and as a reader, and I very much sort of I'm drawn to characters and why people behave as they do. And, you know, sometimes people make decisions and stuff which don't make a lot of sense to me on first reading, because I don't know enough about the background or why they have, you know, made the decisions that they have. And so, for instance, learning about, you know, for instance, something that happened 10 years before to, you know, so, I mean, I can't think of a specific example, but for instance, if I was translating a novel about Hamat in like the 90s or even the 2000s, I think it might never ever make any reference whatsoever to, you know, the events, because people don't really explicitly.
It's a silence that's in the
yeah, exactly. There is a silence. You're absolutely right. That's the right phrase. But I mean, you can't translate a novel without knowing about what happened, you know, even though nobody talks about it. And so I think that's why it sort of helps me. It sort of helps me sort of place people's actions and choices in a way that I can then sort of make sense of.
Yeah, to sort of contextualize it in terms of the world that they're coming out of.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, and sometimes say Karen.
No, you go ahead.
No, sorry. Sometimes you just like, you know, you come across stuff that crops up somewhere. Like, I don't know, like when I was again, like researching Ottoman clothing, for example, and sort of, you know, I was learning about the kind of specific belt that Christians used to wear in 19th century Aleppo. It was a nar. And of course, then, you know, that leads you into like a lot of like, you know, I think when I ended up following like lots of different ways in which sort of Christians and specifically like Syriac Catholics were treated, and you know, it's sort of, so, and again, that feeds back into, you know, how the characters in this novel were you know, why they felt vulnerable, and why they sort of yeah, you know, why sometimes like their actions were more radical than they appeared. You know, someone who sort of, anyway, so as I guess a completely different book, so I'm not going to go down there, but it's just yeah, it just helps to provide more, and it just gives you, yeah, you learn more. Anyway, sorry, Karen, I can see a question in the chat and you were talking, Layla, so I'm going to stop rambling.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's all really important. I think you know, just to pick up on what we were saying, Moja Kaf has a really interesting article about the silence in Syrian literature, and she talks about how writers like Zakaria Tamer and others obviously do this, but how they kind of turn to the surreal and the absurd in order to express what they can't express.
Yeah, that's a great article. I know that one as well.
Yeah, I'll see if I can find it and I'll pop it in the chat. But yeah, there's a load of questions coming in now. So
oh my goodness. Okay, right. So let's see.
The first one by Mary Odoy. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. But this kind of speaks to something that I wanted to ask you as well. So she says the novel has such a distinct narrative voice, which is captured so beautifully. I'd love to hear more, and it is a beautiful translation, Leri, very well done. I'd love to hear more about the process of transferring the voice from Arabic to English, and if you encountered any difficulties. And I mentioned to you when we were chatting, because you're so familiar now with Khalid Khalifa's prose and his work, you've translated 3, 4, you're on the 4th of his novels now? 4, Praise of Hatred, Death is Hard Work, No Knives, and then this 4th one, right?
And then this one, No One Prayed.
No One Prayed.
Yeah, so it must be 4.
Yeah, and so
I feel like I should be more on top of that. But yeah.
No, but so you're very comfortable, I think, with his style, and you translate his style so beautifully. And I feel personally that his prose style is very different to Samar's. And so maybe we can kind of link that with the question of how you made that shift to someone else's, completely unique voice when you've kind of been sitting in Khalifa's prose for so long and become so comfortable with it.
Absolutely. So yeah, that's actually one of the reasons that I was really drawn to this, because I thought it's so different. It's I really wanted to sort of get to grips with something completely different. And yeah, I mean, this sort of Khalid's, prose is sort of, it sort of it spirals in a different way. Like it's sort of, so I've been talking a lot about, yeah, anyway. I should finish sentences while I'm talking to them. Sorry. I was just thinking, speaking a lot about Khalid, and I know we should be here to focus on Planet of Clay. So I'm going to switch focus to specifically talking about Samar, but yeah, and the difference. So I think what I really sort of drew me to this book was the fact that, Khalid's sentences are sort of, like in, Arabic prose is just constructed differently, but they are, contained and, I don't know. And when I read this book, I got the sense of, this narrative voice that just couldn't be contained by grammar or paragraphs or punctuation. And I just had this sense of this voice just like literally like straining at the leash. And that was something that I felt was really important to convey in the translation. So, I did warn the editor when I sent her the draft. I was like, this, yeah, just stick with it, basically, like it is intentional. And she loved it. She loved it. The editor, there were two editors who worked on this, but the one who worked with the most, she's a poet, so she just she got this straight away. But yeah, so that voice was I felt that was the key to sort of feeling like you have this sort of this breathless sense of
urgency,
yeah, exactly, like urgency, this sort of stream of things. She's got so much to say and she's running out of time and she's constrained, like the fact that she has to, I mean, it's like anything, right? Like when you're typing and you want to get stuff out, or you're writing. A long time since I've written an exam with a pen now, but like, and you've got so many thoughts and you're just like, you feel limited by the tools at your disposal. And of course that speaks to the theme of what language can help you express, what can't help you express. And so yeah, that was, I felt, for me, like the key to Rima. And also in terms of she, I mean, something that I discussed with, I think, everyone at this stage of the process was how to capture a voice that is childlike without being childish. I think that was the phrase that Yasmina used to me, and that was just like, that was just like my alarm in my head all the time. Like, it has to be naive but not sentimental, and and it's a tough one because she's 14, so she's not a kid, she's not a little child. She's independent minded, and and she's entered puberty, so she has feelings, and you can't sort of complicate those away, you can't pretend they don't exist, and yet, like, she is the character that she is. So she's not she's the sort of, it's like the inner mind of the wise fool. So it's a strange place to be because she sees things plain without attaching meaning to them. So of course, like when we see a soldier, that brings up a lot of fear and feelings, and you think, when have I seen soldiers, like, what do soldiers do? Oh, they fight and they kill people, and I mean, that's her experience. That's in, like a lot of people in seeing people in military uniform in Syria would have probably like not particularly safe feelings on seeing them. But you know, Rima doesn't have that baggage, like she doesn't have that signification that comes with seeing a uniform. She sees a man in a uniform, and then she describes how they behave. And it's so it was, I definitely had to catch myself from like it was really important to be guided by her rather than trying to like subliminally instill any sense of like trying not to describe too much what she was seeing, if that makes any sense. Like it was a man in a uniform, it's a man in a green uniform holding a gun. That's all she sees, without trying to sort of put in words like, you know, I don't know, like any sort of emotive adjectives or adverbs or anything like that. You know, it's sort of, I mean, obviously they weren't there in the Arabic, so that was helpful. But, you know, it's just when you, especially when you're drafting, you know, it's sort of, you are crafting a sentence, and it feels strange to write something like that, you know, to write, I see, I like, you know what she's seeing, but she doesn't know what she's seeing. So it's to sort of catch yourself from trying to fill in the blanks, you know, as you sort of have an instinct to. But yeah, it was really cool. It was really nice.
I do want to talk more about what the novel does in terms of the limits of language, silence, trauma, narrative control, because she's quite, she displays a lot of anxiety in terms of her storytelling, of like what order it's coming in, reassuring the reader, you know, I'm going to tell you this, but first I'm going to tell you that, and then we'll talk about this. Like there's a lot of anxiety there about maintaining narrative control, which I do want to talk about. But let's talk about her condition, because I know you want to talk about how she's been kind of misread or you know, pathologized in certain ways. So I do want to talk about Rima's condition for, I mean, I'm sure most of you have probably started, and it comes quite early in the book where we learn kind of the characteristics or attributes of it. So there's this, you know, this compulsion to walk, I guess, this kind of unbounded forward motion. And then her silence, which is entirely voluntary. And she says multiple times that she doesn't want to speak. She finds no use for this muscle in her mouth called a tongue, which is also very interesting, this kind of like explicit naming of things. But she does say at the beginning of the book, which I thought was a really beautiful way of talking about her condition. She says on page 14, my feet take over and I walk, I just follow them. I don't understand why it happened, and I'm not expecting you to understand either. This enchantment of mine doesn't care what people might understand. And I thought it was really beautiful, that word, this enchantment, you know, that it's something kind of fantastical. It's a kind of wonderment, you know, and there's something as well that Samar writes on the inner flyleaf at the front. She says, Rima embodies a number of themes close to my heart, such as women's freedom, the relationship between writing and violence, and the new language we might construct in the midst of the terrible events we are living through. Rima is a woman child who tells of the war through her initial shock, which is what people feel in the face of such violence. I have chosen to remain in the realm of wonder to outstrip the violence of the story. So that enchantment and wonder just really linked up in my mind in terms of how to think about Rima as a character and what kind of world she inhabits and tries to express to the reader. So let's talk about that and how reviewers have read her and why someone is so furious about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you might have to stop me because I can say a lot about this. So right. So I mean, exactly like you say, it's pretty explicit that this is a fairy tale, right, of sorts. And, you know, we're in the realm of wonder. I mean, you know, The Little Prince is obviously like a key to the text. So is Alice in Wonderland. And this is literally like a trip through a fantastical world. And she talks a lot about magic. When we were talking, one of the registers that I kept trying to sort of capture at various points in the translation was this sort of fairy tale sense of like, so for instance, obviously like the convention in Arabic is like maybe to say things like to use sort of two similar words when you're sort of making, in the course of a sentence. And I wanted to keep that in English because I thought it lent it a really lovely like rhythm. I was walking and running or something. I don't know, I mean, that's a terrible example, but but I just wanted to yeah. And and like you say, I mean, Samar says it at the beginning, like in the flyleaf, it says it right from the first go, like it's an enchantment. And I mean, also like a girl who can't stop walking, like, I mean, I don't know what else you can do apart from have like a big neon arrow saying metaphor. It's clearly, magical realism is too strong a term because it's not magical realism, but I mean, we're clearly not in the realm of like the world that we inhabit, and I suppose selective mutism does exist. That is a thing that happens, but like there is not a condition which okay, no, I shouldn't say that. There might be a condition which involves people not being able to walk, but as it is expressed by Rima, as it's manifested in Rima, I would be surprised. I think the fact that she is a woman who is voiceless, who is made voiceless, she becomes voiceless in order to express a sense of agency and a certain sense of control. Like, I mean, it's a metaphor for so many things, like for the advance, for women, where women's rights, for women's, the position of women in society, like they move forward, they are compelled to move forward, but they are kept quiet. And like for me as well, I also read her as like, the fact that the power of art, like, people tie her up and they literally, she's left in a basement and she creates because she has this compulsion to overcome. And I just thought that was so beautiful. And I mean, again, like I literally, I was like, oh my gosh, is this too overt? Like, are people going to think this is too blatant? And apparently not, because like
right over their heads.
I mean, yeah, I mean, it was just, I feel, we had some great reviews, and like, I'm grateful for anyone who took the time to read it and write about it, because it's translated literature in general, like, it's gaining in attention, but I mean, it's definitely it definitely sort of doesn't occupy the space that ideally it should do in a sort of multicultural, intercultural, pluralistic society. And I was just really surprised that I don't think anybody picked up on the fact that like she, like Rima herself is a symbol, and she, I mean, people talk about her condition, and she's neurodivergent and she has learning difficulties and she is possibly autistic, and it was just like and yeah, Samar was like not very happy about it. It's she gave a great interview about it. I don't remember off the top of my head now where it ended up. If I can find it, I'll send it so it can sort of be recorded somewhere. But she gave an interview where she was talking about the fact that she's so sick of being treated like, Syrian writing is like, it's not art, it's an explanation, it's some sort of anthropological journalism. And people, like, it's impossible to think that someone could create a work of art on the same level as, I don't know, someone writing in a different language. It's strange because it's not a translation thing, because people are perfectly happy, you know, saying that about different things, but I think it's just there just seems to be this blind spot with certain regions, and you know, I think Arabic in general and Syria falls into this sort of blind spot of people, and they just think like there seems to be less engagement where people recognize it as like the choices are artistic choices and the literary choices. It's not just talking about things that have happened in the war. And, you know, and that might be, you know, obviously like the books that Samar wrote before this are like they are works of archive, like they are documentary works, like very explicitly, you know, but they're different purposes. Like, you know, she wrote those as a journalist, and this, I mean, this is a novel, and you know, everywhere it says, you know, I mean, she refers to novels, and it's, I mean, it's, yeah, it's just, it was, yeah, so that was a little disappointing to say the least. But you know, I think she's made her point in interviews, and you know, and hopefully like we're working on a new one at the moment, a really beautiful novel that's sort of also set during the war, but it's not necessarily about the war. And I'm hoping that sort of that will be, and again, like the main character is a character who is sort of not, you know, in inverted commas, normal, you know, by the standards of the village where he lives, and he's considered an eccentric, and he also doesn't talk much. So hopefully people have sort of understood that this is, you know, a device rather than
a problem, you know, to be diagnosed.
A description of someone's problem. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So there's a lot of questions in the chat kind of linking up with Yazbek's other novel, and similarities with Cinnamon. So there's talk about how there's a lot, I haven't read Cinnamon, but that there's stylistic similarities, lots of repetition, resistance to linearity. So had you read Cinnamon, and you know, did you kind of think about maintaining a kind of voice in terms of Samar's novels in English, or you know, did it impact your translation in any way?
So I very consciously did not read Cinnamon before I did this book, because I didn't want to be, I didn't want to sort of have that. I'm very, I was a bit worried that I would be influenced by it too much. And, you know, I find that, I mean, I've spoken about this somewhere else, but so for instance, I mean, I work very closely with my authors. I'm very lucky to, but, you know, I prefer to have a sort of an initial draft in my head, like, you know, so it, before I sort of go to them and sort of answer questions, I'm sorry, ask questions, just because it, like, I worry that it needs to be like a coherent work, and you know, if it's got too many influences on it, then it can sort of, I think things can sort of, there's too much push and pull, and like things can just lose a bit of coherence. So yeah, so I very consciously did not go and read Cinnamon. I hadn't read all of it for some reason. I can't remember why now, but I did read I think the first half of it afterwards, and I was really relieved, because I was like, okay, they have picked up on like similar things to me. So yeah, so I think there are resonances. I mean, obviously, like it's summer, so there will be resonances. And interestingly, there's like themes and images that have carried over into her latest that I noticed from Planet of Clay, and she didn't notice at all. I asked her about that, and she was like, oh, I didn't realize. So so that was really, that's another example of like a translator sort of really deeply reading things. I mean, not that I'm sort of trying to blow my own trumpet, but it's just, I mean, you know, I think there are obviously like images or things that sort of speak deeply to a writer that they don't necessarily consciously replicate. You'll know this, Layla. But you know, other people pick up on it because it's, you know, they're not sort of inside your head. So it's so yeah, so there are similarities and resonances with, I think, the other translation, but it was a coincidence, a happy coincidence.
Very happy coincidence, yeah. Okay, so there are a couple of questions. I'm going to kind of combine Faisal's earlier question with Alif's question regarding kind of the difference between the Arabic and the English. So Alif says, Rima compares words, linguistic medium, writing, and pictures, drawing throughout the text. So there's this kind of tension between words and visuals. And it seems she plays with the Arabic script to turn letters into pictures. And we're curious about what the original text looks like. There's also some Arabic script that I mentioned to you. There's a Quranic verse, and then the letters later on in the novel where you actually see the Arabic letters. And I think she does talk about how her lettering is kind of bubbly or like circular, like her letters are strange. And then Faisal was asking about translating verbose Arabic into concise English and blurring the lines between fiction, what's fictional and what's real, and rendering trauma. And that kind of ties into one of the questions that I was asking you about before, which is, that the novel itself does have this kind of anxiety about the limits of language and trauma, and what I was talking about before about storytelling and narrative control. And I was thinking about this as well, because when you translate from Arabic to English, often that process requires more language in terms of exposition or glossing the text for a reader who's not familiar. And so maybe we can talk about that, and if there were kind of certain compromises that had to be made in moving from Arabic to English, or what those differences looked like on the page, linguistically, all of that.
Sure. So yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, I translate sometimes from Italian, not for publication, but just like for myself. And like, interestingly, even though my Italian is not as good as my Arabic, it's much easier to translate from a Romance language. That's something that so precisely because of what you say, because there's so much, like everything is so different. Like so Faisal's question, like that I don't know basically how to describe it. I think there is a sense of like it's just there's some times when you can sort of the synonym, like the synonym or the words that sort of crop up the same in Arabic are different to the words that crop up all the time in English. So for instance, like there might be like, so speaking words, for example, people will say, hala, just hala, or at a stretch there might be like soracha, and that will sort of be the only indication you get about the tone of someone's voice. And I think sometimes you do have to go a bit further with that, because I mean, in English, when you just have like he said, she said, he said, she said, I mean, that gets really, it distracts and it unnecessarily, I think. And I think that's different to where there are just, some writers just have a word they just like and they just use it a lot. And for me, that's a stylistic thing. So I probably wouldn't change that too much. Like, editors usually pick up on it, and like, I'll give it to them sometimes and I'll just be like, yeah, okay, we can use a synonym here and there. But, because it is a stylistic thing. And actually, interestingly, I didn't realize that I have a style. I think it was in No Knives. It might have been someone, it was definitely with that press, where I had, like, I was translating something and I wrote astonished like 17 times in the text or something in the whole novel, and the editor was like, can they just be surprised sometimes? I was like, yeah, okay.
we all have those words that we turn to.
Yeah, exactly. So now every time I write astonished, it was years ago, and I'm still like, oh god, how many times have I used this now?
You'll never forget it. It'll always be when you try and use it, you'll think back to it.
Yeah, exactly. So that's always really funny. But so I think you just have to sort of use your judgment a bit. But yeah, it does, like, there's definitely more explanation that needs doing, but you know, I try and not to, like, weirdly I'm quite resistant to like explain. I do the minimum of explanation that I can get away with. You know, if it's relevant for the plot, then I'll explain, but otherwise I'm like, people can figure it out, it's fine.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like we were saying before, you know, there's things that go into like the world of the novel that aren't necessarily explicit, and you know, I feel like as a reader, like there's loads of stuff that I read that goes over my head, and like I you know, I know that I accept it. You know, if I choose to look into it further, then I'm like, oh yeah, you know, that impacts how I read this book, you know, about places that I've never been to, or you know, like I have, you know, some books about, you know, I have what's it called, Strange Beasts of China, Fantastic Beasts of China, or something that's been on my bookshelf. I mean, I don't get to read for fun at all anymore, but like sorry, I'm doing a PhD, so you understand, Layla. That
Very
wasn't
well. Very well.
And but yeah, I mean, you know, it's gonna be loads of stuff that I miss in that, and that's fine, you know, it's okay. So I think the stuff that I try and explain, or the stuff that I try and like make more concise, is stuff that relates to like specifically the language, and if it's absolutely necessary, I'll do it for the plot. But yeah, it is hard. I'm one of these people who I include like lots of notes to my editors explaining what happened and why, and why it doesn't need to be in the text. And I think they're a bit confused as to why I produce these, like, you know, long explanations of things that will not appear anywhere. But I'm just like, well, you don't know. So yeah, it's
but the reader doesn't need to know. They can go and
the reader doesn't need to know, they're fine. Yeah, it's a weird tension.
Yeah, I always kind of play this game whenever I read a translation, where I'm like, I wonder if that was in the original, because you know, like the Arabic reader would not have needed this explained, but maybe the writer did put that in intentionally, even in the Arabic, for, you know, whatever reason they had. So like, I opened the book up at random and this popped out to me, and it was one of those instances where I thought about it. Whoever has the book, you can open to 239, that's where I'm reading from. But she says, I used to look at it, her first secret planet, and know that making time into a fairy didn't really work, because the word fairy is feminine, of course, in Arabic, jinniya, and time in the language here is masculine. So waqt is masculine. Now that feminine masculine wouldn't have had to be explained in Arabic. So is that something that you added in, or it's something that was in the original?
That was in the original.
Oh, it was. Yeah. See, these are things that I'm always like, I wonder, did she put that in explicitly, or
no? I don't. It'd be interesting to know how. I like thinking about how that would be expressed. I mean, that, because that would be yeah, I don't know how she would, I can't, yeah, anyway, but yeah, no, that was entirely Samar. Yeah, there were a few places where I was like, oh, like that she felt that she wanted to put a sorry, I can hear lots of noise going on downstairs. I don't know what's happening. So anyway,
chaos happening downstairs.
But yeah, no, she's yeah, no, that was Samar. Yeah.
Oh, well, oh my gosh, we've come up to an hour. I mean, I still have loads of questions, but we are cognizant of the time, and
I'm happy to carry on as long as you guys are. I appreciate that people might have to shoot off, because I know especially at tea time it can be a bit difficult, but you know, I'm happy to keep going for anyone who is willing to stay.
I mean, I could talk about it for hours, but does anyone want to pop in? If anyone has a comment or a question that they would like.
Oh my gosh, I've got 22 messages in the chat. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've covered everything that's in the chat. Okay. I've been trying to keep an eye on it, so I don't know if anything has slipped past. But if anyone would like to come in and ask anything, please do. We've covered all these things.
Oh, about blurring fictional, real, and rendering trauma. Oh, we haven't talked about trauma, I don't think, have we?
We haven't talked about trauma, and we could talk about trauma for hours. I mean, that's what my PhD is on.
Yeah, I mean, I think you'd be best placed, Layla, to speak about this.
Yeah, we could talk about trauma for days and days.
That's why I just put my mic on as well, to ask you both what you thought about your comparative treatment of trauma and voicelessness and the use of language.
Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Well, go on, Layla, you go first. Thank you, Lindsay, for that, by the way.
Yeah, I was thinking about this when I was reading it, because I mean, my second novel also concerns the Syrian conflict, but a refugee who has left that conflict and come to England. But you know, she also has this kind of selective mutism, or we're not sure whether her silence is voluntary or not. And she kind of retreats, I guess, into these imaginary, surreal, kind of fantastical spaces. There's a lot of literary intertext as well. But I was thinking about like the limits of language. Rima has a lot of anxiety about meaning and assigning meaning to experiences, and whether those meanings are transferable or translatable across languages, across cultures, across time and space. And my character has a kind of anxiety about language as well, and how do we express things, and maintaining a sense of control over a narrative and over a story, when people are trying to wrestle that control away from you. And so for Rima, I think it's not so much that someone's trying to wrestle the story away from her, as it is like what we were talking about at the beginning, the sense of urgency she has to get the story out, because she's quite literally on a time crunch. And as we approach the end, it does get extremely tense. And the situation it's very dire. And so there is that circular, repetitive looping. It's almost like she talks about these bubbles, and we know that the bubbles are horrifying, and we know what these bubbles refer to, but in a way her stories are like bubbles as well, that she's trying to grab, and that she's trying to kind of like maintain a hold on, and they keep just like slipping away. But it was very interesting, I think, the way that was rendered on the page for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think you're right that I really like the image of the bubbles. I think that's really beautiful, Layla. So there's like, I think there is a big sense, the thing about meanings, I agree. I think she was sort of, there's anxiety, but there's also like excitement there. Like, you know, when she talks about that sort of medieval dictionary, I thought that was wonderful. I actually had to get in touch with an old professor of mine, and because his field is texts from I can't remember which centuries, but long ago. And I was just like, have I got this right? And he was sort of reassuring me that it was okay. I found it fascinating that she was able to think about meaning separately to what it was assigned to. Yeah, exactly. Like, I mean, I think, and that is part of the whole key, I think. I read a really interesting review, I think it was translated from Swedish, of this book, where the reviewer said, I mean, translating the absurdity of war, I mean, how else can you, severing meaning from words? I mean, it's just, it completely makes us, I thought it was very sorry, that would have been a lot more effective if I could actually remember what the review said. It was, I thought it was really, really beautifully put. And yeah, because I think this is a thing she has, you know, that, and I think this ties into her, she's grasping at so many things to try and express herself, like not just, you know, she's very clear about what words can help her do and like the depth and breadth that words can achieve, but also, you know, you know, there's things that words can't express, and that's why she's drawn to particularly like visual images. I don't think she talks a lot about music, but she talks a lot about, you know, the, you know, reciting the Quran, and the fact that, you know, people, you know, she had somebody, I think at some point, say, you know, stop putting tunes in it, you know, it shouldn't be that musical. And, you know, but that's the sort of style of recitation that she was really drawn to, and that she sort of considered was sort of most expressive, of that sacred text. And, you know, I think, you know, what comes across is the fact that, you know, there are these experiences which really seek to be expressed and made visible, or made, you know, you know, so, you know, just sort of laid out for others, and that, you know, we can't, we feel like it's just, there are some things that, you know, that can't be expressed. And you know, I think that isn't necessarily always specific to trauma, but you know, as far as I can understand, you know, it is a feature of trauma. You know, she is, yeah, I mean, it's, look, I'm struggling to express it myself. Here we go.
I mean, I think you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, in terms of trauma, that is obviously a big trope of trauma narratives, is this idea that words are not referential enough, that they're not enough to capture the meaning. And for trauma, it's that the trauma is inaccessible and cannot be put into words. But obviously, you know, with Rima, it's not so much that it's inaccessible. I mean, she hasn't forgotten it by any means. She's experiencing it, but, you know, for her, I think it's like the affective totality of what she's experiencing. Words are too small for it. It encompasses the visual field, the, you know, sound. It's inscribed on the body. It's, you know, it's animal sensations. Like she talks about this rabbit in the chest, and, you know, where fear lives and how hunger, you know, resides in the body, but fear is like a circle. And, you know, it's like, there's so much that needs to be brought in to express, you know, the affect there.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Layla, and I'm sorry for joining in these conditions. But I'm having too many comments and questions. I just want to come, but I'm holding myself just for this the last point of trauma, and I was wondering about the idea of grieving, and she was trying to handle this feeling, and the way she was mourning the death of her mother and brother, and the loss of people around her. And I just want to ask, how did you find this? How the narrator way of grieving is expressed, and how she's trying to overcome that? Because I was thinking that she was going back to the past, to her drawings, to the novel that she lost. So her trauma is, I think, is enveloped by many other triggers. I would like to know your opinion about that. And I'm sorry, I have to cut off.
No, not at all. Thank you for jumping in. Yeah, it was interesting about her mother, because, to be honest, at one point I was sort of like, I remember there was some point during the text I was sort of, she talks about when her mother disappeared, and then she sort of doesn't really say anything about her feelings afterwards. She's just sort of confused, but, you know, where has she gone? And, you know, but then there's at some point, I think it comes quite late on, if I remember rightly, where she talks about this dream that she had about her mother, and that the fact that her mother then turns into a cloud, and then she woke up and she can see it all the time. And she mentions briefly that this cloud is here all the time, like even, you know, now when I'm in the cellar. You know, so yeah, it's interesting because there was a lot of silence around the mother. But yeah, like maybe going back to...
And disappeared is kind of a euphemism for death all around, like of her loved ones. She doesn't really say that they died. She mostly says that they disappeared.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's unable to express, I think. She cannot.
Yeah, and
her
she
silence
kind of, like,
even
turns away from it, and then she comes back, and then she turns away, and then she comes back.
Yeah, this is. I think her silence would both was both external and internal. She's facing their struggle inside. And also, I have another question quickly about the. I think Nancy mentioned that about the Quranic about the Quranic chantings, and I found that Leri, you used many words to refer to the word recite. You have sing, read, and recite. Because in Quran we have tartil, which is recited only. So I just want to ask about that.
Sure. I mean, she refers a lot to tartil, like that's the particular phrase that crops up a lot. And you know, for me, I think because I think one of the original drafts was, I think I used the word tartil a lot more, and then I think for whatever reason we sort of, because also it's a bit difficult because, you know, sometimes when you sort of, because it's not always necessary, especially when it's a verb in English, it's sort of like if you say, I don't know, like you do tartil or something, like it doesn't always necessarily also, like it can just be a bit tautological, right? It's like, you know, shaiti, it's like, you know, tortilla recitation. It's like, okay. But I think what we really wanted to convey was the fact that it was the sort of the musicality which was most important to Rima, and that she was and that she really wanted to express in that way. So I made sure that there were some references to the Arabic word, but yeah, whenever I said like sing or chant or anything like that, I wanted to sort of convey that that musicality. So yeah, and that's also a good example of what we were talking about before, about the sort of the different yeah, like how to gloss stuff in Arabic, and or not in Arabic, what do I write it? English, in English. And yeah, it's yeah, there was something, sorry, I noticed that visual language, yeah, exactly. And I think you're right, Lindsay. I sort of, you know, there isn't a lot, and she talks about it as well, you know, and she says that like what she sees around her is very sorry, I'm referring now to Lindsay's comment in the chat when she says about the richness of visual language is important given the sort of stripping down of the sort of setting. And yeah, you're right, she mentions it too, where she sort of is like, you know, I'm so bored, everything's grey, there's no colour, like there's no people. And so she sort of this, you know, incredibly like colourful, rich, textured, you know, surreal images that sort of come up in her mind. Yeah.
Although there are times when the visual field is quite horrifying and overwhelming.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, yeah, some of those scenes are just, yeah,
they're hard,
very, very hard. Yeah. But it's interesting how she deflects away from those sometimes, and she focuses.
Yeah, and it sort of, it feeds back into something that I was thinking about before, actually, which is that like the audience for this writing, I mean, she talks about it a lot. Like she's like, I don't know who you are, maybe you're Hassan or a friend of Hassan's, and you know, and you know, she sort of she muses on her audience, but she doesn't really sort of focus too much on who they are or why they are. And I think so that's something that comes out a lot in the text, is that, you know, she, you know, when we were talking about sort of struggling to express, and like, you know, she often talks about people who don't understand her, and you know, she thinks she's being extremely explicit and blatant even without her words, and she gets really frustrated when people don't understand what she's saying, or you know, and I think that sort of goes back a little bit to this, where like, you know, she can't say, you know, this person died, this person disappeared, like, you know, I miss my mother. And so I'm sort of, I was often sort of thinking when I was writing this, I was like, who is this? I mean, it is an explicit question, like, who is it for? When she feels that no one could, like, why is this text, like, why does she feel that this is the, even imperfect and incomplete as she herself acknowledges it to be as a medium, like, why is she drawn to it, and why is she sort of so compulsively creating? But yeah, it's interesting. It is very interesting. This book is so interesting.
Yeah, I was thinking about that too as well the whole way through. I was like, who is she writing this for? Who is going to find this? What does this thing look like? Why is she doing it? You know, there's this kind of urgency to set something down. But you're always thinking about, well, who's going to find it? Who's going to read it? What's it for?
Yeah, and this is the thing, it's like, I found it quite interesting, like there were a couple of people who are like in different languages as well, like in the translation, where there were different reviewers who were sort of like, you know, talking about her inevitable end. And I don't know if people have read all the way through, and I know it's being recorded, so I'll try and talk about it without being too explicit, but like, I think there is a question mark over the end. I don't know, that's how I read it anyway. I don't necessarily think it's as set in stone as some readers do. But I mean, that might just be because I'm very attached to this character. So I'm not committing myself to that. But yeah, but exactly, like, you know, when the end of the text comes, like, what comes next? You know, like, yeah, who finds it? And under what circumstances, and what, I don't know. It's an interesting thing to think about, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the book is pretty careful, I think, about not really, I mean, I didn't read the ending as open as that, but, you know, I thought that it doesn't really offer any answers, because there aren't any answers to be offered, I think, you know, especially at the time that this book, like the setting of it, which, I mean, it's really a testament to how horrific the events in Syria have been, that I had a moment of confusion figuring out which chemical attack she was talking about. Like, for some reason, my initial thought was Duma. I don't know why. My initial thought was Duma in 2018. And then I was like, no, it can't possibly be that, because it was published in 2017. And then you have to backtrack and think about it. And
you're like, yeah, which particular
which one was it?
Which
which horrific event during this conflict are we talking about? And it's 2013 in Eastern Ghouta, which I think is, you know, that's part of the reason why I think you can't, like, she can't offer that kind of field of vision to see into the horizon, because that was really like when the violence was really kind of starting to hit a peak, like,
yeah, definitely, you know. And I think violence. You know, and you know, and I think, you know, it's interesting what you say about field of vision, because I think she very specifically is like, this is, and that's another reason that, you know, I would sort of be careful about reading this book as a work of like archive or documentary. I mean, it's about an individual perspective, and her perspective is limited because she's one person. So yeah, you're exactly right. She's not like, yes, this is the chemical attack that took place in Ghouta in 2013. I mean, I think she mentions the year a couple of times, but like, yeah, it's sort of, I don't know. It's pretty depressing to think about. Yeah. I mean, it's almost like, in a way, it's almost, I don't mean timeless in the sense of, I mean, it's obviously very specifically located and situated and in a particular time as well. And the aftermath of the attack, right? I mean, that's something that like Samar was very, very, I mean, you know, we spoke about it as well. She was just, you know, she talked about her reaction to when she first heard about the fact that, you know, these women were not disrobed because, you know, hurma.
Hurma.
And
Yes. I underlined
and of course that led to their deaths. And you know, the fact that something was being privileged over their lives, you know, she was, you know, I mean, I can't say she was shocked because, you know, I think it wasn't shocking to her, but I don't want to speak for her, but I mean, it stuck in her mind. I remember her saying that, like, it was a detail that she felt was very important to include in the book.
Oh, I absolutely think it was very important, and it sparked in my mind a story that happened in Saudi Arabia, I think in Riyadh, several years ago, where there was a fire in a girls' school and they wouldn't let the girls come out because they weren't wearing their hijabs.
Yeah.
And so many of the girls died in the fire because they weren't allowed to leave the building because they weren't properly veiled. You know, so these things, like the absurdity of it, and especially in a time of war, when everything has broken down, like the entire society has broken down, and yet still there are these things that they hold on to, you know, that make no sense. Like they didn't make sense when society was functioning, but they really don't make sense when there's a chemical attack happening.
Yeah.
You know,
this is the thing, and it's like, you know, and who gets to make those decisions as well? Like, you know, it's, you know, who is just, like that decision is made for them. That
and Hassan, her love interest, fights it. Like he goes against it as well.
Yeah, he does. And he, I mean, someone even shouts at him because he's too near the women. Yeah. And Hassan's like, they're dead. Like, you know, there's no, what is the, like, what is the problem with me being near them there? But yeah. So that's actually interesting. Go back to Hassan. Like, I don't know, like, because I think one thing that's left ambiguous is, you know, I mean, obviously he goes, and I mean, it's unlikely that he's coming back, put it that way. But I read that, especially their last scene together. Like, I still don't know. I swing between whether he was prevented from coming back, you know, by an attack, or whether he just sort of decided
to leave.
You know, and I don't think that's ever made clear, in my opinion. Anyway, I don't know if anyone else has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, but, I kind of assumed he was like caught up in the fighting and he couldn't come back, but he disappeared essentially.
I assumed so as well. And then there was like a moment in that scene where thank you so much, Sam, by the way, thank you for coming, and Lindsay. It's really, and you know, thank you for all the really thoughtful comments. Yeah, no, I mean, I to be honest, I initially read, I mean, I might just be reading too much into that scene, but there was a moment where I felt like there was, I don't know, I think it's just before he leaves where I was like, oh, I'm not certain of his motivation. But yeah, I mean, that might just be, I mean, again, it's you know, there's a lot going on in that scene. So but yeah.
It's interesting. Well, I mean, if anyone, or rather if no one has any last comments or questions, then we can start to wrap things up. I mean, we've gone through most of my questions, so, which I'm very happy about, because I thought, you know, that we wouldn't get to cover them all. But this has been a really great discussion about the ins and outs of translation, and the kind of struggles that you go through with the text, and which I think you should go through a struggle with the text. It shouldn't be something easy to do. There should be some wrestling that goes on there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think what's always interesting actually is when we have different I mean, yeah, sometimes Samar and I, we have different, how do I put it? Not necessarily readings, but like, I mean, so for instance, you know, there's stuff that, I mean, there's comments that you've made in this session, for instance, which are things that I definitely didn't like explicitly think, or that I was, you know, I mean, and it's just, yeah, it's interesting that like there's stuff that Samar puts into it that it's sort of, how do I put, yeah, that's just, I mean, it's all part of the reading and creating and writing experience. And it's, yeah, you're right, it should be a wrestle. I think if it's too easy, then that's a sign you're definitely not doing it right.
Something has broken down in the process if it's too easy.
Yeah.
Well, we appreciate your time, Leri, and we appreciate your work. It is a beautiful translation, and I can't wait to read the next one that you come out with. I think it's going to be Khalifa's. Is that the next one that's on doc?
So I don't know which one is coming out first.
That's a good problem to have.
Yeah. I think they're both coming out in 2023, so you will have a little while to wait, Layla. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I just need to finish the PhD.
Yeah. But yeah, no, they're both, I mean, very different, very beautiful, as you would expect from two different and, you know,
beautiful writers,
gifted writers.
Absolutely.
And thank you all so much for having me. Thank you for your really thoughtful comments and questions. I always enjoy being here. I hope you invite me back the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you everybody for your engagement and for your questions and your comments. And our next Minawa session is going to be Passage to the Plaza, and we're lucky enough to have the translator Sawad Hussein joining us for that session as well, very generously. So please make sure you come. It's quite astonishing that it took like 30 years for this novel to get published, but we can, we can.
So good as well.
It is. So please, everybody, do come for that. And both Leri and Sawad are going to be joining us at our Minawa conference at the end of June for a translation panel, which we're very excited about. And if you just keep following Minawa, we will give you all the information that you need for that. But thanks, everybody. And thank you, Leri, so much.
Thank you so much, Layla. Another wonderful event. Thank you for everything you put into it.
Thank you. And I hope you feel better soon.
Yeah, me too. This has been an excellent, I felt like the best that I have for like a week. So thank you.
It's been really good. The LUMSIP works.
Yeah. Literary discussions.
Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
I will email everybody about the recording, so don't worry about that. If you're on the Minawa mailing list, I'll give you an update on that. So thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.